This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things could get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming, and I am so excited for this, I will be welcoming one of the original bass players of Blondie today. And I'm talking about Gary Lachman, aka Gary Valentine. Gary got to play on Blondie's very first album. He got to play bass on that album, and he got to co-write their very first hit, Ex Offender. And it's going to be a great show today. This guy, he went from Blondie to forming his own band called No, to being in Iggy Pop's band, to leaving music and getting into mysticism and the occult and writing books about it. His most recent book is called The Return of Holy Russia, and it's going to be a really great conversation today. Oh, I forgot to mention, too, he dated another guest of mine many years ago, Lisa Jane Persky, and wrote a song about her called I Am Always Touched by Your Presence, which, you know, when I first interviewed Lisa, I was absolutely terrified during that time because it was the beginning of me starting the podcast, and I didn't really delve into it, but I will delve into it with Gary today, and I'm so excited for this conversation. So yeah, here is my interview with Gary Lachman. Hey Gary, welcome to the show, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. Tommy, how are you doing?
I'm doing spectacular. I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. This is great.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, going back in time, at what age did you start gravitating toward music?
Well, I guess I grew up with it. I'm a late boomer, I guess, and I grew up sort of in the 60s, pre-Beatles. I remember the girl groups, people like Gary U.S. Bonds and Chubby Checker, Let's Twist Again. So I guess I was aware of it because it was just in the background, on AM radio. So I grew up, I had the radio on in the morning going to school, and it just was a time when there was one good song after the other. So I guess it was there, and then I was like every other kid. I was a Beatle fan, and the British Invasion started. Saw them on Ed Sullivan, and my aunt took my sister and I and some cousins to see Hard Day's Night and things like that. So that fed into a long-term Anglophilia, sort of kind. Because at the same time there was a lot of good pop culture on TV coming over from the UK as well, like shows like The Avengers. With Diana Rigg and The Prisoner and things like that, and the James Bond films. But I mean, in terms of actually doing it, when I grew up in Jersey, I mean, all the people I knew in high school, they were all these great musos. I mean, one of them went on to be the drummer in Blondie, Clem Burke, but he was in a few bands. At the time, he was like a year ahead of me in high school, and I used to see his band play and a few different bands, and all these other people were great guitarists and so on. And I just kind of hung out around them. They kind of let me hang out with them, so I wasn't really a musician. But that was good when it came time to do it in 74 or whatever, 75 in New York, because it wasn't about being a fantastic musician. It was about sort of, I don't know, the look and the DIY, having the courage to get up there and do it yourself without going to the Juilliard School of Music. So, and I guess I the way I think of it, I just stored a lot of these melodies and rhythms and so on from listening to the radio when I was growing up, and because that's when it came time to play. I was writing songs. The songs, sort of came out that way, and that's one reason why the early Blondie had that sort of 60s sound. I mean, they were,
Right.
Debbie was aiming for it as well, but X Offender is just like one of, that kind of, Ronettes kind of tune. So, I guess when I was about 18, I mean, I started playing Blondie, I was 19. I guess I was 18. I was hanging out in New York and hanging out at a place called Club 82 and, being on the scene and all that sort of thing. So I guess, I guess 18 is when I kind of crossed the river, as it was, from Jersey over to New York.
Yeah. Was bass your only instrument?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I played bass in Blondie because they needed a bass player, and I didn't have a bass at the time. I didn't have anything. They had to borrow, bass and amp from everybody. But I, picked up guitar, and then I played guitar on X Offender, on the first Blondie single.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did the shows, we used to switch off. It was Chris, the guitarist, he didn't care for it, but in any case, I enjoyed playing the guitar, so we used to switch off, and I would play guitar on it, and those. I mean, and then after, I played bass on one album after playing in Blondie. A fellow named Moon Martin, who I don't know if he's around anymore. And he had written a couple of hits or something, and he got an album, and I played bass with him, and the drummer from the Dwight Twilley band, Phil, I can't remember his last name now.
Phil Seymour.
Phil Seymour, he played drums on it. And we were recording that album at the same time as Cheap Trick were doing something like in the studio next door, and we all used to play on this pinball machine. This was about this is like 77, 78, 78. And we always, it was a fantastic pinball machine because it just let you win all the time.
Oh, cool.
So we all, in between takes, we're racking up these fantastic numbers and all that,
Yeah. Do you remember the first album you ever bought?
The first album I ever bought? The first album I can remember pestering my parents to get is this weird Beatles album that came out at the end of their sort of career. It was like bits and pieces that hadn't been on albums before.
Right.
It was sort of, I guess it must have been sort of after Let It Be or something like that. And it was on sale somewhere. And it was like, I don't know, Passaic or someplace outside of where I grew up in Bayonne, but it was someplace they had to drive to go. And, I guess, I don't know, I just asked them. So they finally relented, and, we went and got it. I think, like, what's on it? Like Paperback Writer, Ballad of John and Yoko, things like that. Like, sort of things that were on singles but hadn't turned up in any albums before.
Nice.
And but when I was a kid, again, my father, he used to, he's from a generation where they had 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. And one thing he used to do was he was sort of a part-time caterer, and he used to use a hall in this tavern, and they had the jukebox. And he used to be able to go in and take out, some of the old, 45s. So he used to bring home, 45s. And so he'd bring home like Beatles and the Stones and Kinks and things like that. So I remember getting, quite a few of those things free.
Yeah. How about the first concert you ever went to?
Let me see. Well, the one I always think of was at the things in Gaelic Park, which is in the Bronx, if I'm not mistaken, in New York. And I think it was like 10 years after, and Edgar Winter. I'm mixing them up, but there was one that was 10 years after Edgar Winter. Flash, who were kind of Yes clone, I think at the time. They were sort of a kind of a pop prog rock, Children of the Universe, I think was their moment. But there was another one where it was the Jeff Beck group, Blue Oyster Cult. I can't remember now, but it was around that time. So that must have been about 72, maybe.
Okay.
Something like that. And then in rock finally came to Bayonne, in Bayonne, New Jersey. I remember Canned Heat played at a local theater. And Dr. John, the Night Tripper.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is it. So I was kind of like too young to be a hippie, too old to be a punk. I was kind of in the in-between, kind of crowd there. So I remember, concerts I remember quite, vividly of Pink Floyd when they did Dark Side of the Moon. That must, I don't know, when is that, 73? Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is at the old Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City, which doesn't exist anymore. And another, I went to one Grateful Dead concert, and my joke about that is that I fell asleep, during some, jam of theirs, and I woke up a half hour later, and they were playing the same song. So, no, that was, I wasn't a big Deadhead, but I did go see them. I mean, but the concert that changed my life was seeing the New York Dolls at Club 82, this old drag club in the East Village, and that was like, because they were the band who said, you don't have to, let's say, go to the Juilliard School of Music. You just need to, play an A chord, maybe a D and an E, but do them with a lot of commitment and passion, and who cares? And it's rock, and they were like, they're I guess glitter or glam, but pre-punk, but they just were made, I said, I could do that, or at least they're playing songs that I could figure out how to play,
Right.
And that was sort of the ground around, what happened in New York.
Right.
With, the very stripped down, simple, the music that started there in the mid 70s.
Yeah, magical music too. So when Blondie came into your life, Fred Smith had already left and joined television after Richard Hell had left.
Yeah, that's the story. That's my little branch on the tree. The story, as far as I understand, is that Patti Smith told Fred Smith, no relation, that he should leave Blondie because they're not going to go anywhere. And Richard Hell can't play bass, and Tom needs somebody who can actually play. And Tom's a genius, and so on. And I guess at first that sounded like a good idea, because the first television album, they, at least here in the UK, they were huge. It's it was a really big thing. And Blondie, we were lucky, to sort of tag along. But then obviously later on, that wasn't the case. But yeah, that's what happened. Richard Hell quit television. He started the Heartbreakers with Johnny Thunders from. And Jerry Nolan from the New York Dolls. Fred Smith quit Blondie. This was the second time I think Patti Smith stole somebody from Debbie, because I think he took Ivan Krall away from her too, who was a guitarist, and he worked with her for a while. And I was living on East 10th Street in the East Village, between Avenue A and First Avenue. And this was a time when, you didn't go into Alphabet City. You didn't go Avenue A, B, C. It wasn't like today in New York. You throw a rock in any direction, you hit somebody making, 5 or 6 figure, yearly income. But back then it was, really, bad neighborhood. And I was starving, and I was writing very bad poetry. Not on purpose. I thought it was brilliant, but I later came to understand it wasn't that good. And this is when Clem had first started playing with Blondie, and they were doing these little diving bars,
right.
And Wall Street and 23rd Street and just anywhere, There really wasn't, CB's hadn't really taken off. Max's Kansas City it was still closed down, so there really wasn't anywhere to play. And I would tag along to some of these. And then when Fred Smith quit, he said, "Why don't you audition?" And I said I didn't have a bass, but I could kind of plunk away at it. And I had been writing songs on this broken down piano in the storefront I was living in. It was like every other key, literally, didn't work. In any case, self-taught. And I went to their rehearsal space, and we jammed on the old Stone song, "Live With Me." I think it was on Beggar's Banquet. And then they said, okay. And then, so that was that. that's on Let It Bleed. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
That was the spring of '75, and I was still living in Jersey at the beginning, but then when I was coming in at like 4 a.m. or something, my parents, understandably, weren't that keen on it, and it was like, okay, either quit this band and go back to college, or leave. And so I left, and I was, I guess, well, they call it couch surfing now, but I was crashing different places for a while, and then I wound up living with Chris and Debbie in this little flat she had in Little Italy, on I think it was Sullivan Street.
Mm-hmm.
And then I lived there for a few months with them, and then we got the famous Blondie loft on the Bowery, which was just a stone's throw from CBGB's and all the action.
Yeah. So who were the other bands that you guys were on the bill with at that time?
Oh, it was the CBGB's regular. So we did a lot of shows with the Ramones. I mean, that was we did a lot of shows with the Ramones. It's funny here in London. You see people have the Ramones T-shirt. A lot. You see it a lot, especially in Camden, the borough I live in. Mm-hmm. And when they have the old one with the originals on it, I always say to myself, yeah, I knew all of them, and they're all dead. It was Ramones, the Heartbreakers, Talking Heads, and we didn't do too many shows with television in CBGB's, although we did do a UK tour with them. That was later on, and also bands that nobody knows about anymore, or just aficionados know, like the Mumps, Lance Loud's band, and Rob Dupre was guitarist. He played when I had my own band for a while. He did quite a few shows with me, and then I wound up playing with him in Iggy Pop, a backup band for Iggy Pop in 1981, and he was Iggy's guitarist for a while. Mm-hmm. It was a band called the Miamis, who nobody knows. So they were like original. They were on that scene for quite some time, and they were a very funny, topical, kind of satirical band. But they wrote pop songs, but they were clever, but they didn't get a deal. I mean, a lot of these people, they wound up on. I shouldn't say wound up, but there's a record of them on sort of like a Max's Kansas City live album or a CBGB live kind of album or something like that. But it's a shame that they're not as represented as they should have been.
How about did you ever see the Flesh Tones?
I remember them. I mean, I know that. I mean, I wasn't a fan, but I do remember them being around. It was kind of like a second generation bands. I'm trying to remember some of the names. God, I haven't thought about this time. the Erasers, or somebody like the Erasers, who were like the second sort of generation. They came a bit later. Because you had the original. It wasn't called punk. It was New York rock or street rock or underground rock. The first big show was the Festival of Unsigned rock bands or something at CBGB. It wasn't until it was the Punk magazine turned up, and then I guess I don't know the chronology, the Sex Pistols, sort of branding it, and then that things change, and you had this kind of there was the way I see it, there was an early kind of art rock kind of fusion in '74, early '75, with people like Patti Smith and Verlaine and Hell, and it was like interesting lyrics, harkening back to sort of French symbolist Baudelaire and Rimbaud and so on and so on, and then it's simple, very very simple but powerful, high energy kind of rock, and then there was the kind of screw the art, let's just play loud music, so like the Dead Boys and I don't know, the Dictators, and then there was the no wave, and it was just screw the music, let's just play weird, avant-garde, unlistenable,
suicide
kind of art rock.
Yeah, like Suicide or Bad
Well,
Brains.
I mean, but he was around. But Suicide. Yeah, I mean, but Suicide was around. He was around. I mean, he was an original too. I mean, Alan was around. In the early days. He goes back to the Mercer Art Center, which was the place that predated all the CBGB thing. I had never gone there because it had collapsed before then. I mean, literally, the building had collapsed.
Oh.
That's the story. And because that was like, the Dolls played there, Suicide, and there was a band called the Magic Tramps that they were famous New York band at the time. They didn't get a deal when they merged, but they were one of the. And the thing about New York is you could be really popular and famous and make a living playing it in New York, and nobody knows you across the Hudson.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. I mean, that was the old joke. The old joke is that, the New York Dolls, they couldn't get arrested outside of New York, meaning like nobody would pay attention to them anywhere. But New York itself is such, it can generate enough interest and, and a following, so you could do it there. But no, I mean, I'm, Klaus Nomi, he's somebody I'm thinking of, in the later times, it's just, he did that operatic, with the Screamers. I mean, I guess they were in LA. Yeah. That's the other thing too. I was out in LA, with my band, The No, in 78, 79, and 80. And then we were bi-coastal. We were going back and forth between LA and New York.
Did you guys did you guys ever encounter Andy Warhol in those places?
I didn't personally. I mean, I've gone to some sort of parties that was at the what is it, the Factory, and so it's sort of on the fringe. I mean, Debbie and Chris. Again, I was sort of saying, sort of the pre-CB scene had a lot to do with kind of like the off Broadway scene, and that had a lot to do with sort of gay kind of scene. And one thing, I mean, my girlfriend at the time, Lisa Persky, an actress and a photographer and a writer.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, she was doing a play with Divine, from Pink Flamingos. Yeah. In the Truck and Warehouse Theater and around the corner from CBGB's, that she was raped on stage twice, twice a night in the performance. And I say in my book, New York Rocker, but after a couple of weeks, practically everybody on the scene had seen my girlfriend naked twice. So it was that kind of thing. And then Blondie, we did the music for something called Vain Victory, which was a weird campy play by Jackie Curtis, who was one of the Warhol set and all that. So it was always in the back, kind of in the background there. That campy kind of thing was that sort of side of it, was kind of on the fringe. But I have to say, personally, I've never been impressed by Warhol. That first Velvet's on Underground album is the only thing he ever did that I like. And I whenever I think of him, I feel sorry for the guy who designed the Brillo box.
Yeah.
Because I think the story is. I don't remember his name. I think he was an abstract expressionist, and he couldn't make a living painting, so he went into commercial art.
Right.
He designs the Brillo box, and then Warhol turns it into turns into art.
I love the pure garage punk sound of the first Blondie album. It's so fresh, so subversive, yet it has a commercial sound as well. You mentioned before about Ex Offender, about how it was inspired by the Ronettes. I also hear a little bit of like the Seeds and Mitch Ryder in the song as well. How did it come about?
The song?
Yeah.
I was at Max's Kansas City one night, which was kind of the club that it had its day back in the 60s and early 70s. It closed, and then when the scene started again, somebody else took it over, and it opened up again. It was bands were playing there, and I was just there one evening, and I don't know, somehow the melody came into my head. I don't know, and I guess around the same time it was the Bruce Springsteen Born to Run. That had surprised everybody by being a hit because it had that Telstar, guitar in it, which is very, very bright, trebly. If you remember the Telstar Walk Don't Run and all that kind of thing. And so that kind of chord change, that progression, sort of big chords, sweeping big chords opening up. And then, I don't know, the melody just came into my head, and then I, went home, picked up the guitar, got the music down, and then I got the lyrics for the chorus, but I couldn't come up with any lyrics, for the verses. And then I played it to Debbie the next day, and so she said, "Okay, let me think about it." So she came up with the lyrics, for the verse, and turned it into this song about a cop, falling in love, or the hooker falling in love with the cop who's arresting her, and all that. And there's all this backstory that gets brought into it about my own personal problem at the time, but it was never consciously a kind of decision for the song to be about that. Somehow it became, I don't know how it happened during the course of people talking to Debbie about the song, how it turned out to be something about this trouble I was going through at the time. But in any case, it's good to have a myth. It's good to have and the reason I wound up playing guitar in it, because I just didn't think Chris had that feeling. He was more of a kind of a funky kind of guitarist, and he didn't have that bright kind of forward drive that kind of early '60s stuff had. And I also, it's my song. I want to play it. I mean, I fully admit I had a very big ego. I still do. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere without it. I would have given up trying to do anything a long, long time ago. But I have this nagging, ego that always wants to, push ahead and create things and so on and get attention for them. And so I just said, well, I want to, I want to play the guitar on it and all that. So that I guess that sowed the seed of the dissension that eventually led to my having to leave Blondie. But it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah. You also co-wrote Kung Fu Girls. I love how Deftery plays the organ on it. It's kind of like The Doors, but without sounding bleak,
Yeah, we put this kind of Elizabethan sort of, kind of riff in the middle. That was a song. It was originally, again, it was a song I had this lick when I had that, and then because I had a lot of things that. Again, back when I was a teenager and I was first learning to play, I had my parents, again, they graciously relented and actually got me an acoustic guitar once, and then I had broken all the treble strings. So I only had like the top bass strings. So it's an E, A, and a D. And I somehow restrung it so that it was just like a 3-string bass acoustic guitar. And I figure out Sunshine of Your Love, or you figure out Satisfaction, or, I don't know. And all those, classic kinds of riffs. And then I started making up kind of riffs like that. So that was one I had made up at one point and just kept. And then it was half a takeoff on Patti Smith. And you can, if you listen to, you can hear Debbie doing those little high note pitch kind of things that Patti was doing in Horses and all that. But originally we were going to give the song to the Heartbreakers.
Nice.
But then we thought it was too good, so we held on to it.
Did Patti and Debbie dislike each other?
Oh no, they loved each other intensely. No, there's a long-standing story of a feud between the two of them. Though this club ain't big enough for the both of us. As I was saying, there was this. There's all these stories like in the early days when Debbie, because they had both been around for a long time. Debbie had a band in the late '60s, a band called Wind in the Willows, kind of like a late hippie band. I don't think it went anywhere. I think they may have made one album. And she was working as a waitress at Max's, the old Max's, the original Max's, Kansas City, when Patti was there hanging out with that was the place the Warhol crowd used to hang out in.
Yeah.
So Patti Smith was hanging out there. So she was serving drinks to Patti Smith at one point, and then Debbie had gone through several incarnations of trying to get a band going. I don't know, the Stilettos, Angel and Snake. There were a few other, kind of pre-Blondie. There was like Blondie and the Bonsai Babies. It was like, a few different attempts to try and get a grab on things. And there were all these stories how in the early days, playing at CBGB's, Patty would be standing way in the back of the not that it's huge, but in the back of the bar, of the club, and like kind of visibly mumbling and making sort of faces and all this kind of stuff. So, that was the story. I mean, how much truth there was to it, but there was this kind of mafia, because there was the management agency, the Warthog Agency, and they did Patti Smith, they did television, and then there was Terry Ork, who put out the first television single, Johnny Jewel, and so they were kind of like, they were trying to control the scene and who played where and all that kind of thing, right. And so there was all, so it was kind of it's me, I'm fresh to all of this. I'm saying, wow, I'm in New York. I'm playing in a band. I'm writing my own songs. This is fantastic. And then I don't realize there's all this kind of, really grim kind of cutthroat stuff, going on, but behind the scenes and all that. So, but that's fine. If you don't, it's classic. It's a classic thing. It's the enthusiast in the early days, and then when the suits come in, and right. It starts to get serious about. You say the first Blondie album had this kind of amateurish quality to it, which I think it does, and that's fine, because that was the point. You don't just turn into just another. Here we are, another band.
Yeah.
All that kind of thing, and so that was what was great about those bands then, because literally pretty close to learning how to play in front of everybody,
Yeah.
If you went to some of the real early shows, it was like that. But it was exciting because of that. Because if you could go to whatever, any other rock concert, you can see corporate rock in action. There it is. It's exactly what you expect, and it's perfect and all that. But it's just boring.
Yeah.
That what was happening on stage there, very famous yet, and there weren't that many people. I mean, half the audience was other bands, coming to see everybody and all that.
Right.
But it had this excitement, in the air, and I can still get flashes of that feeling, being there and being up on stage and playing.
Right. Tell me about I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear. It's based on your relationship with Lisa and telepathy, is that correct?
Well, more, sort of telepathy, but sort of shared dreaming. What had happened is that we were on tour,
mm-hmm.
and whenever I wanted to call, Lisa, she would somehow be, just about to call me too. Or it turned out that we had very similar sorts of dreams. And I had become quite interested in, I guess, the paranormal and magic and occult and all the kind of weird stuff I write about now at that time. Because when I was living in the Blondie loft with Chris and Debbie, mm-hmm. They had a kind of kitschy pop interest in, magic. And it was like, upside down crosses and pentagrams and voodoo dolls and things like that. But in that milieu, there were books, and I'm a inveterate insatiable reader, and somebody I came across at this time was the infamous Aleister Crowley, mm-hmm. who's the most notorious magician of the last century, and people like Jimmy Page or
right.
Bowie and so many others are into him, and so on and so on. And I just got interested in this stuff. I started to get interested. And another book that really got me going was a book just simply called The Occult. It was by a British writer named Colin Wilson. And I later became friends with him, and I wound up writing a book about him actually. Mm-hmm. But this was a very readable kind of history of all of this sort of stuff, going back to, early prehistoric times and to contemporary times and so on. So I just became fascinated with it. And I started, reading more and more about it, and just in this indiscriminate, enthusiastic kind of way, just absorbing all of it. And started writing my dreams down and this kind of thing. And Lisa was interested in it too. And so, this just happened. It just turned out that, whoa, this is strange, isn't it? And again, where does the song come from? I don't know.
Yeah.
From the ideal realm, from the magic unconscious. It just floats into your head. And again, the melody just started coming into my head, and that like that kind of riff. And again, that's a very kind of 60s kind of sound. It's almost like a Beatles-ish Ticket to Ride kind of sound almost, or something. And then again, I wrote the whole song, and it's known as the kind of my farewell sort of swan song to Blondie and all that. But it's been recorded by a few different people. Aside from Blondie, so it's got around. I've got quite a bit of mileage out of it.
Yeah, it's a great song. I love the version Blondie recorded, but I also like Tracy Ullman and Annie Lennox's versions. Did you like those versions?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was surprised that they did them, and Tracy Ullman's is kind of. Plus, that whole album, "You Broke My Heart" in 17 places. So it's again, that's a very harkening back to that kind of pop girl group pop sound.
Yeah, great album. So you moved to LA. You formed the No. Completely different scene than New York was. It was a magical scene in LA at that time. But you guys kind of struggled to get a record deal and all of that.
Yeah, well, we didn't get it. I mean, we came close a few times. We did a few, demo performances. We did demo for, Warner Brothers and different things. And it's a shame. What can I say? I think one of I forget, somebody who liked us.
Yeah.
But what they said is that we were too spare and brainy. That was the problem. So it was too stripped out of a sound. It just was a 3-piece. It was just me on guitar, great bass player, Richard Dandria. And drums, and I sang, and I wrote pretty much most of the songs. But it was all, it was. I mean, I'm a good rhythm guitarist, but I'm not a great lead guitarist or anything like that. And it had. We were exciting. We did really good live shows. I mean, and we back and forth between LA and New York. LA, we played the Whiskey. We were the first band to play in Madame Wong's, which was that was one of the big clubs in Chinatown, in LA. And then in New York, we played Max's Lobby. We also played Hurrah, which was it was a big sort of disco discotheque, but they also started playing rock bands, and for a while we were doing really well. I mean, we were back and forth between LA and New York, and then doing kind of little coastal tours, so up and down the East Coast, up and down the West Coast, and we played quite a few places. We played out in Salt Lake City once, just one of the strangest gigs that we ever did. But yeah, we never quite, we didn't quite make it. We got close, but it didn't happen, and then. I guess at about towards the end of 1980, I kind of cashed it in, and just stopped playing. I hung my Stratocaster on the wall, as it were, and I was just living in New York for a while, not knowing exactly what to do. And this is when I got a call. Well, Rob Dupre, who said he was in the Mumps, but he was playing with Iggy at the time. And there, Ivan Krall was playing with them, and he jumped ship just before a tour.
Right.
And Rob said, do you want to play guitar on tour, with me and Iggy and la da da da. And I said, sure. I said, you probably know most of the songs. I said, sure. When do we go? I said, well, it's tomorrow. or something like that. And so I had to like, okay, fine. So I dusted off the guitar, got my, my rock clothes together or whatever, and got on this disco, tour bus, and it was like, oh my God, what a thing. It must have been some disco band who had it before, because it was so, it was just, it was something that you would have thought you might have seen in a movie.
Yeah.
It was a spoof on all this, and that was that was a wild tour.
Yeah.
And then we did another one, but with Clem playing drums. Dougie Bone, who would play drums the first time around, he dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Soul, who was playing keyboards, Iggy didn't want him anymore for some reason. Mm-hmm. And we wound up, it was three guitarists. It was Rob, Carlos Alomar,
yeah,
who played with Bowie, and me. And I was just kind of strumming, just doing the rhythm in the background, and those guys, would do all the fancy stuff. And there's a couple videos out, I think, on YouTube. There's of some live. There's one show from San Francisco. I remember seeing, and I remember that one in particular because afterwards Allen Ginsberg came backstage and something to join with Iggy and Clem and me and whatever. So these things stand out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Iggy, he seems like this supremely eccentric, mythic dude,
He's certainly a force of nature. He's certainly a strange character. And we got on, and he wanted me to write songs with him, but I don't know, I just didn't feel, I didn't feel inspired. What I liked about doing those shows is I liked being a hired gun.
Yeah.
It was kind of like it was sort of like the Wild Bunch,
mm-hmm.
that Peckinpah film. Because his Arista Records, he had the Party album would come out,
right.
And this was make or break. Either this one does well or that's it. And so that was the brief that we had to like party. So he was kind of literally like that. He was knocking back quite a bit of everything wherever we were. But he was remarkable. It's amazing he's still alive. In the sense of understanding what he went through. And for a while here in London or in the UK, he was doing insurance commercials for I forget what company. But the idea was, if we insure him, we'll insure anybody. But no, there's some fantastic stories. I mean, there's one story is when we opened for the Rolling Stones at the Silverdome in Detroit, and Santana was on the bill as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he when we went on, it's a huge stage, but the opening act, you're restricted to a pretty small area of it. And the people in the audience, 80,000 plus of them, they were not there to see Iggy Pop. And they threw everything they possibly could at us. And so you're in this huge space and it's pitch dark. So you can't see anything until it's about 6 inches away from you or whatever. So mm-hmm. all these things are coming out of the darkness at us. And after that, Bill Graham, he had somebody collect everything. Mm-hmm. And he and Iggy went out after the show and they announced, it was 25 Bic lighters or, those $75 in change, whatever it was, or somebody's sneaker. So it was like, and then there was, I forget where the show was, where he was wearing tights, nylons, and he didn't have underwear on, and the crown jewels were kind of on display, as it were, or not exactly, but close enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had very antagonistic. He had a genius for antagonizing the audience, but they loved him.
Oh yeah, I mean that set the stage for G.G. Allin. With all the craziness. So what made you want to become a writer?
Funnily enough, I always did. I don't know why. When I was growing up, I said I wrote poetry. I've always been a reader. I know I was reading comic books before I was 5. Because I do have, one of my earliest memories is of asking my grandmother for a dime, for 10 cents to go buy a comic book. This is when comic books were 10 cents. And in 1961, they became 12 cents. They went up in price. And I remember it was hard enough to get the dime from my grandmother. It was pretty tough getting that. And going to the shop, the candy store, to buy a comic. And the guy said, sorry, they're 12 cents now. And I had to go back. And, she really didn't want to give me the other 2 cents, but she wound up giving it to me. So that was about 1961. So I was born at the end of 55.
Right.
So I had been reading comics already. So I was reading, pretty early. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, again, where these things come from, I have no idea. Why did I think being a poet was supposed to be, something that was cool? But I guess I grew up reading these kinds of things. I got the tail end of the 60s, do your own thing, follow the beat of a different drum,
right? Don't
conform, all of that sensibility. So I was reading the beats, and Herman Hesse, like millions of other adolescents in the States and the UK. I was a Herman Hesse, a big reader fan, and all that kind of stuff. Because that was, I don't know so much today, but I know at that time certain books were part of that whole thing, So I was reading books on Zen, and so I guess I'm a sensitive guy. I don't know. I mean, I know one book I can remember from school. This was before high school. This was still grammar school in the States.
Yeah.
It must have been seventh or eighth grade. And they used to have this kind of book fair. It must have been some company would just come in and they would sell books, and you ask your parents for some money so you can buy some books and blah blah blah, that kind of thing. And I remember there was one paperback book that had lyrics from people like Lennon and Dylan and Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale, or Donovan,
right,
Sonny Goodstreet, and things like that. And so the lyrics would be on one page, and then they'd have a poem on the other, like a famous poem, like Kubla Khan by Coleridge, or Love Song of J. Alfred J. Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, or something like that.
Right.
And I'd be thinking like, Lennon's lyrics to "I Am a Walrus" next to some, I don't know, other avant-garde kind of poet, and it seemed, I couldn't play an instrument, but I could write lyrics. That's what I could do. So I think that was the kind of thing. It was sort of the combination of reading comics and getting just the reading being a very, very important experience, because it's a very inner experience. And that's the sort of thing I'm interested in now. Our interiority and what takes place there. So my introduction to that was through reading, and then again, much like the milieu I found myself in 75 in New York, where there was this kind of link between poetry and rock. And today I don't think, say, Dylan's lyrics, stand up in the same way as, say, like T.S. Eliot. And I think it's one of the great absurdities of our time that he got the Nobel Prize for literature. I have nothing against them, but I just think it just tells us something about the age we live in today.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time. I mean, I said I wrote all this bad poetry. Then that got turned into writing, halfway decent songs. But then I really, because I read and read and read, I was constantly reading. I mean, when I was on tour with Blondie the first time around, and people were picking up my bag. I said, "What do you got in here? Rocks?" And it was like, a dozen books or something. So I was constantly reading. So I gradually, just in a way, I became too smart for rock and roll, if I could put it that way. What I was interested in, wanted to say, I couldn't say in that form anymore. And some people are songsmiths. They can sit down and bang. They could put a tune together. And I was never like that. You needed the inspiration. It was some kind of drive. Something came out, and a need, a need to express. And when that sort of wasn't happening anymore, I couldn't write songs anymore. And then that, but it took me quite some time. Writing the songs just kind of popped out. I never, got a lesson. I never learned how to play guitar from anything other than friends I knew showing me a chord or two. But to learn how to write something that someone else would read, and not only that someone would pay you for it. It took quite some time. It took me about 10 years to learn how to do that.
Right.
Over time. It's the kind of writing I do isn't the kind of writing that you might immediately associate with someone who was a musician, who was a songwriter, which is more personal or poetic. And no, it's about ideas, and it's not academic, because I'm interested in writing for people that are interested in ideas and are intelligent, but not for academics, because that too just strikes me as a very sterile kind of environment.
Right. Your most recent book is The Return of Holy Russia. Have you gotten a great response from it?
Oh, I've got a lot of good response. There's a lot of good reviews on Amazon, and people who have read it have enjoyed it. One of the more gratifying things I've got some kudos for it from some Russians. Who said, this is pretty good. This is a pretty good book about Russia from somebody who's never been there and can't speak the language. And that was a strange. I didn't start out wanting to write a history of Russia, which a kind of mystical sort of history of Russia it is. It's not exactly that, but it's sort of that. But this, I did that book started out as a follow-up to the previous book. It was called Dark Star Rising, which is about Trump and all this weird kind of occult politics in the background around him, around his campaign and his early presidency, and so on and so on. And something similar was happening in Russia too. And so there's a chapter about Putin and a variety of some strange, eccentric individuals around his circle with some very, very strange ideas, but had a lot of material left over. Nice. And so I decided I wanted to do something with it, and then it turned out that this is what was happening. So I pitched it to a publisher, and they went for it. But it's again, it turned out to be something I didn't think. What happened was that because I didn't know too much about Russian history, and a reader of the book might agree, but. I became fascinated with it as I was reading it, and this whole story, because it really is a strange, different place. And Westerners or Americans, especially if you think Russia, the first thing they just think communists. That's what they think, and rightly so, because that's what Russia's been for for quite some time. But it has this long history of not that, and it does have this it takes its spirituality and its religious beliefs very, very seriously, much more than, say, in the West. America has separation of church and state. It's not quite the same over there. And we can say the whole kind of supernatural character to religion, miracles and visitations and things of that sort, is something that's very much a part of their worldview, and a very magical kind of worldview, like a kind of nature mysticism, and it goes back to a kind of indigenous paganism that's being revived today and all that. So I just became more and more fascinated with it, finding out for myself. And what I enjoy doing, and I think people who read my books get this and they enjoy it, is that I became really, really interested in this. I'm just learning about this, and I'm trying to communicate what I'm learning and the enthusiasm about it to the reader as well. So it might not be something that they...
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you...
No, I was going to say, it might not be something that they...
Uh-huh. Never mind, go ahead. I was going to say, are you currently working on anything now?
Well, I did a book last summer during the first lockdown here in London, and talking about the paranormal in dreams. And it's about precognitive dreams I've had over the last 40 years. And precognitive means basically you dream something, and that day, or maybe the next day, something that was in the dream happens like in real life, and it's so unmistakably the same. It isn't something that, ooh, that's kind of like it, and you kind of convince yourself, but it's pretty much it. And this goes back to when I said I started reading about all this stuff, and I started to write my dreams down. And I read a book that was published in the 1920s called An Experiment with Time, and a fellow named J.W. Dunn, who's not an occultist, not a paranormal researcher. He was an aeronautical engineer. But he, too, just by chance, started to record his dreams, and he recognized that actually bits and pieces of the future, his personal future, were turning up in the dreams. And it would be something that he would read in the newspaper, or something he might see in a book or something like that. And nowadays, for me, it's something I might see on television or in a film. And I'd given a talk here in London before COVID hit about this sort of thing. And actually, the next day, someone tweeted, someone who had been at the talk tweeted, and she said, "OMG, but it's true." I went to this great talk, last night. The guy said, if I just write my dreams down, I'll see. I might dream bits of the future, and I did. And what she wrote was that she dreamt that she dreamt that she had, was out in the street and had picked up a hedgehog.
Yeah.
They're these strange animals they have in England, and took it out of the street and put it over on the side somewhere so it wouldn't get run over. And she said the first thing she saw when she went onto her Twitter feed was there was a post about how to protect hedgehogs. So it wasn't exactly, but it was like the very first thing she saw was what she did in the dream.
Right.
And so I'm assuming that wasn't a prank. So I took that as a sign, and I thought, okay, I should find. I've been recording these things for years and years and years. So I thought I finally, asked one of my publishers if they were interested in the book. So it's a short book. It's, I don't know, it's probably like 70,000 words. But it goes into. I've recorded them for a long time. And there's one in there that I can't go into it now because it's too detailed. But
okay.
it just strikes me as there's no way around it that this is not. I mean, it has to do with that old early 90s film, The Shadow, with Alec Baldwin.
Right.
So I put it very simply, about a couple years in advance of that film, I dreamed several scenes of it. Exactly. And even, not so much dialogue, but the description of some of the things in it. So, and I have that down in journals I kept at the time.
Right.
So I'm hoping when it should have been out this year, but because of COVID, it got pushed back. But I'm hoping when it comes out that I'm going to send it to all the paranormal researchers I know, and it'd be very gratifying if it got in the book somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I hope that works out for you, Gary, and I want to thank you so much for coming on today. This has been fantastic.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. You have yourself a great day, and please stay safe over there.
You too. Take care, Tommy.
Okay. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Gary Lachman. Ain't he a cool dude? What a nice guy, huh? It was great to talk to him. Very passionate about his passions. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying there's no shame in living in the past because the present sucks. Later, dudes.